Oak Ridge Mall on a Thursday afternoon in early November looked the way most places do when the holiday season hasn't quite arrived, but the decorations have already gone up. Fake warmth hanging from real ceilings, garland draped over storefronts that smelled like cinnamon candles and credit card debt. Ryan Mitchell had been awake since 5:14 a.m. Not by choice. Sophie had crawled into his bed sometime around 3, tucked herself against his ribs the way she always did, and then proceeded to kick him every 11 minutes until sunrise. He'd given up somewhere around 5, made coffee he barely tasted, and spent the next hour staring at the grocery list on the refrigerator door, wondering when a $12 box of cereal became normal. He was 34 years old. He drove a 2009 Honda Civic with a cracked rear bumper and a passenger side window that didn't roll all the way down. He worked the loading dock at Hartwell Distribution Center on Route 9 6 days a week, first shift. His hands were wide and rough, and there was a scar above his left thumb from a box cutter accident 2 Augusts ago that had never fully faded. He was not the kind of man who spent Thursday afternoons at Oak Ridge Mall. But Sophie's left sneaker had finally given out, the sole peeling back from the toe like a curling piece of tape. And she'd been wearing it anyway, the way kids do, completely unbothered, flapping slightly with every step. He'd noticed it Monday. He'd promised her Tuesday. It was Thursday now, and a promise was a promise. "Can I get the pink ones?" Sophie asked. She was holding his hand, walking fast to keep up, her small voice half swallowed by the mall's ambient noise. Pop music drifted down from invisible speakers. A perfume cloud hit them somewhere near the east entrance, and she wrinkled her nose. "We'll see what they have." "That means no." "That means we'll see what they have." She looked up at him. 6 years old, brown eyes, a small gap between her front teeth that she'd had since her baby teeth fell out 6 months ago. She was wearing her winter coat, the purple one, slightly too big, bought with next year in mind, and her hair was in 2 braids that had gone a little loose on one side. "What if they only have ugly ones?" "Then we get the least ugly ones." "That's not how shopping works, Dad." He didn't answer. He was already watching the layout of the mall, trying to remember where the shoe stores were. He hadn't been inside Oak Ridge in almost 2 years. The place had changed. New storefronts, new signage, everything a little shinier than he remembered. There was a fountain near the center atrium that hadn't been there before. Real marble, it looked like. Or something designed to look like real marble. He noticed the store on their left without meaning to. Harmon and Company. The name in brushed gold letters above a display window that held 3 handbags and a single silk scarf arranged on a white pedestal under a worn spotlight. The handbags were not priced. Things that weren't priced were never meant for people like Ryan Mitchell, and he understood that without any particular bitterness. He was about to walk past it. Then he heard the voice. She was standing just outside the entrance of Harmon and Company, maybe 4 feet from the door, and she looked like someone's grandmother. That was the most precise way to say it. Not frail, not pathetic, just old in the way people used to be old before the word started carrying apology. She was perhaps 75, maybe older, wearing a gray wool coat that had seen many winters. Brown leather shoes, worn at the heel. A canvas tote bag hanging from one arm with a rolled-up paper bag tucked inside, the kind you get at a grocery store bakery. Her white hair was cut short and neat. Her posture was straight. She was holding the door handle of Harmon and Company with one hand, and a woman in a black blazer was blocking her from entering. The woman in the blazer was Jennifer Watts, store manager, mid-30s, dark ponytail, the kind of practiced smile that had been trained to look warm and function cold. She had the polished, slightly airless energy of someone who had once been told she was going places and had made a personality out of the expectation. "Ma'am," Jennifer said again, not unkindly, but precisely. The word was a wall dressed as a welcome. "I'm sorry, but we do have a policy regarding—" "I just want to look," the old woman said. Her voice was steady, not pleading. Simply factual, the way someone states the obvious. I understand that, but our clientele. I'm not asking about your clientele. I'm asking to come inside. Ryan slowed down. Sophie felt his grip change and looked up at him. There was a security guard standing a few feet back. Travis Cole, his badge red, thick-armed, square-jawed, the kind of man who had learned to use his size as punctuation. He wasn't saying anything. He was just standing close enough that his presence said everything. I think, Jennifer said, adjusting her smile by one precise degree, that you might be more comfortable at some of the other stores further down. There's a lovely... I've been in this building since before you were born, the woman said. Jennifer's smile didn't move. I'm sorry? I said. The woman stopped. She looked at Jennifer. Then at Travis. Then at the door, the gold letters, the window display with its 3 handbags and its silk scarf. Something moved across her face. Not pain exactly. More like recognition. The kind that comes from seeing something you built behave in a way you never intended. She let go of the door handle. She stepped back. And every single person nearby looked away. A couple with a stroller turned slightly in the other direction. A teenager in a hoodie glanced up from his phone and looked back down. A woman in gym clothes pretended to read a sign about a holiday sale that hadn't started yet. 12, maybe 15 people in visible distance. All of them breathing. All of them choosing not to see. Ryan Mitchell stopped walking. Sophie had gone quiet. That was the thing Ryan noticed first. She had been asking about shoes 4 seconds ago, asking with the particular persistence of a 6-year-old who treats every question as a negotiation, and now she wasn't saying anything. He looked down at her. Her eyes were wet. Not crying yet. Just filling. She was watching the old woman step back from the door, and something in Sophie's face had gone very still. The way children's faces go still when they see something their instincts understand before their language can catch up. Ryan felt something tighten in his chest. He thought about the line at Hartwell Distribution. He thought about shift manager Dave Keller telling him last March, in the break room, in a voice that was friendly in a way that was also a warning. Ryan, buddy, you gotta stop making things harder than they need to be. He thought about the one time, 3 years ago, he'd pushed back on something at his old job. Something small, a scheduling thing that wasn't fair, and had spent the next 6 weeks being assigned the worst routes, the earliest hours, the coldest loading bays. He thought about his Civic with the cracked bumper. He thought about $12 cereal. He thought about being a single father who couldn't afford to lose a job, couldn't afford a fight, couldn't afford to be the kind of man who made things harder than they needed to be. He stood still for 4 full seconds. Then Sophie looked up at him. She didn't say anything. She just looked at him with those brown eyes that still had tears in them. And Ryan Mitchell, 34 years old, loading dock worker, man of no particular status, looked back at her. He made a decision. He let go of her hand. Stay right here, he said. Right here, okay? Right by this column. Don't move. Dad. I'll be 15 seconds. He walked toward the door of Harmon & Company. Jennifer saw him coming and recalibrated. He watched her do it, a small, practiced adjustment, the slight lift of the chin, the squaring of the shoulders that meant she'd already placed him. Ryan was wearing his good jeans. His jacket was a gray canvas work coat from Target, bought on sale. His boots were steel-toed, not stylish. He looked exactly like what he was, a working man in a shopping mall who had no business being in front of her store. But he was walking toward her with a directness that didn't fit the category she'd filed him in. He stopped a foot from her. What did she do? He asked. Jennifer blinked. Excuse me? The woman. He gestured toward the old woman who had now taken a few more steps back, watching him with an unreadable expression. What did she do? To not be allowed in your store? Sir, this is a private. What did she do? He wasn't loud. He wasn't aggressive. His voice was low and flat, and it had no performance in it whatsoever, which made it, in that moment, very hard to deflect. Jennifer's smile moved into its backup position, the one that was slightly less warm and slightly more formal. We have a customer experience policy that... A policy. Ryan repeated the word the way you repeat a word when you want the person who said it to hear how it sounds. She was trying to open a door, and you stopped her. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to... Because of her coat? Ryan said. Her shoes. What exactly is the policy? Travis stepped forward. One step. That was all. He was a big man, and one step from a big man is its own kind of statement. Ryan turned and looked at him. He didn't move back. Travis stopped. There was a moment, one of those moments that only lasts 3 seconds but gets remembered for years, where the whole small geometry of the situation hung in the air. Jennifer and her practiced smile. Travis and his one deliberate step. Ryan Mitchell, unmoved, in a jacket from Target, in boots with steel toes, not going anywhere. Her name is Dorothy, said a voice. Ryan turned. The old woman was standing a few feet behind him. She was looking at Ryan with the same unreadable expression, but something in it had shifted, a kind of careful attention, like she was seeing something she hadn't expected. My name is Dorothy Harmon, she said. I've been trying to look at a scarf. Ryan turned back to Jennifer. She wants to look at a scarf, he said. Jennifer's jaw was doing something subtle but visible. Her eyes cut briefly to the small crowd that had gathered, because crowds gather the moment things become interesting, the moment neutrality becomes a performance that takes more energy than watching. There were more people now, maybe 20, some with phones. Sir, Jennifer said carefully, I don't know who you think you are, but this establishment. I'm nobody, Ryan said. I work a loading dock on Route 9. I drive a cracked-up Civic, and I came here to buy my daughter a pair of shoes. He paused. And I'm standing here because she's, he gestured toward Dorothy, standing out here, and she shouldn't be. Jennifer opened her mouth. Then closed it. From somewhere in the growing crowd, someone started recording. She had been on the 3rd floor. Ashley Harmon, 31 years old, CEO of Harmon & Company and Oak Ridge Mall Properties, LLC, had been standing at the floor-to-ceiling glass on the east mezzanine reviewing a lease renewal proposal on her tablet, when the Harmon & Company storefront below caught her eye, not because of the gathering crowd, but because of the woman in the gray wool coat. Ashley knew that coat. She knew it the way you know a smell that goes straight past thought, the gray wool, the worn heel of those brown shoes, the canvas tote with the bakery bag tucked inside. She had seen that coat 100 times in 100 different contexts, sitting across from her at the kitchen table on Sunday mornings, hanging on the hook by the door of the house on Meridian Street, draped over the back of a chair in a conference room on the 7th floor, when Dorothy Harmon still ran every meeting herself. Ashley's tablet dropped to her side. She was already moving. The elevator took 42 seconds, and she counted every one of them. When she stepped out into the first-floor atrium, the crowd had doubled. She could hear a voice, low, male, the kind of voice that wasn't performing anything, and she pushed through the edge of the gathered people before she saw the man. She saw her grandmother first. Dorothy was standing straight, back exact, chin level. The canvas tote bag was still on her arm, and her hands were folded in front of her, and she was watching the man in the gray canvas jacket with an expression Ashley had seen maybe 4 times in her life. The expression Dorothy wore when she was deciding whether someone was worth trusting. Ashley had only ever seen her grandmother make that face about people she ultimately decided were. She pushed through the remaining crowd. Ashley, dot. Dorothy's voice was calm. A statement, not a surprise. Ashley stopped beside her grandmother. She was in a tailored navy blazer, dark slacks, the kind of put-together that Oak Ridge's new signage had been designed to project. She was a head shorter than Ryan Mitchell, and she looked at him with the same assessing attention her grandmother had been giving him for the last 4 minutes. "Who are you?" she asked. "Ryan Mitchell." "Why are you here?" "Buying shoes." He paused. "And watching something that shouldn't be happening." Ashley looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Jennifer, who had gone the careful blank of someone who has just calculated that they are on the wrong side of a situation, but hasn't yet decided how to exit. Then Ashley looked out at the crowd, at the phones, at the recording that was already, she understood this without being told, on its way to becoming something permanent. She took a slow breath. "Can someone get me the security footage from this entrance for the last 20 minutes? She said it to no one specific. She didn't need to. Travis said hi. "Yes, ma'am." Ashley turned to Jennifer. "Your lanyard, please." Jennifer's hand moved to her chest, to the ID badge and its security lanyard. "Miss Harmon, I—" "Your lanyard," Ashley said again. The crowd was very quiet. Jennifer unclipped the lanyard. Her hand was shaking slightly, just slightly, just enough to be visible if you were looking. She held it out, and Ashley took it with 2 fingers like she was picking something up off the floor. Then Ashley turned to her grandmother and did something the crowd did not expect. She put her arm around Dorothy's shoulders and leaned in, and her voice went quiet. Genuinely quiet. Not for effect, the way voices go when they're talking to someone they love. "Gran," she said, "I'm sorry." Dorothy was quiet for a moment. "I needed to see," Dorothy said, "whether it was still here." Ashley didn't ask what it was. She knew. Anyone who had spent 47 years building something because they believed that business could be conducted with decency, that a store could be profitable without being cruel, knew exactly what it meant. "Is it?" Ashley asked. Dorothy looked past her. She looked at Ryan Mitchell, who was standing a few feet away, slightly awkward now that the confrontation was over, one hand in his jacket pocket, glancing back toward the column where Sophie was standing, visible across the atrium, small and still, watching. Dorothy looked at Ryan for a long time. "Parts of it," she said finally. The security footage was pulled and reviewed within the hour. Ashley Harmon watched it in the mall management office on the 2nd floor, sitting across a long table from the head of HR, the operations director, and 2 members of legal. The footage was 9 minutes and 42 seconds long, and it was, without any room for interpretation, damning. Jennifer Watts could be seen stopping Dorothy at the door. Could be seen making a small practiced gesture with her hand, not aggressive, not dramatic, but deliberate, steering the old woman away from the entrance. The audio was clean. The words were clear. "Our clientele," said twice. And then the part where Travis stepped forward, that one step that was designed to be felt rather than seen, that was visible too. Ashley watched the whole thing without speaking. Then she closed the laptop. "Jennifer Watts," she said, "effective today." The HR director nodded. "Travis Cole, suspended pending full review." Another nod. "I want a complete audit of complaint records for this location going back 3 years. Every incident, every note, everything." She stood up. The room was quiet. Not the quiet of discomfort. The quiet of people who understood that they were in the presence of someone who had just made up her mind about something that went well beyond today's incident. Ashley left the room. She went to find Dorothy, who was sitting in the back of the mall's private family lounge, a room most people didn't know existed, with good chairs and no piped-in music, and a window that looked out over the parking lot to the tree line beyond. Dorothy was eating a piece of coffee cake from the bakery bag. Ashley sat down across from her. "You could have told me," Ashley said. "Could have." Dorothy broke off another piece of cake. "Wouldn't have told me what I needed to know." "You came in disguise." "I came in my clothes." Dorothy looked at her. "These are my clothes, Ashley. This is what I wear. I wasn't performing anything." Ashley was quiet. "I needed to know," Dorothy said, "whether the people running this building understood that." She set the cake down. 47 years ago, I opened the first Harmon store on this site. I was 28 years old. I had $11,000 saved, and a lease I'd negotiated for 6 months. I had one employee, a woman named Cecilia Park, who I paid $14 an hour in 1977, because that was what she was worth, and I knew it. She paused. "I built this because I believe you could make something good, not just profitable, good." Her hands were still in her lap. I needed to know if that was still true. "And?" Ashley asked. Dorothy was quiet for a moment. "The man in the jacket," she said. Ashley waited. "He didn't know," Dorothy said. "That's the whole thing." She looked at her granddaughter. "He didn't know who I was. He didn't know who you were. He had, a child over there somewhere." He kept looking back to check on her. She picked up the coffee cake again. "He stood in front of a door for a stranger in a used coat, and it cost him something. You could see it cost him something. He stood there anyway." Ashley said nothing. "That," Dorothy said, "is still worth something." It was a Tuesday, 7 days later. Ryan Mitchell had worked Monday. He'd worked the load-in shift, 6 to 2, unloading flatbeds in 38-degree weather, with gloves that had a hole in the right index finger he kept meaning to replace. He'd made Sophie's lunch, turkey and cheese, apple slices, the crackers she liked, and dropped her at school by 7:40. He'd picked her up at 3:15. They'd had pasta for dinner. She'd done her reading homework. He'd told her to brush her teeth 3 times before she actually did. He had not thought much about the mall. He had told the story once to his coworker Marcus during a break over bad vending machine coffee, and Marcus had looked at him and said, "Man, you're lucky you didn't get thrown out." And Ryan had thought about it and said, "Yeah, probably." And that had been the end of the conversation. He did not know about the footage. He did not know it had been shared 22,000 times in 72 hours. He did not know that 3 local news stations had picked it up, or that someone had posted a longer version on a video platform that had been watched 400,000 times by Friday afternoon. He did not know that the woman in the gray coat had a name that anyone with a copy of a business textbook, published before 2005, would recognize. He found out about the call on Tuesday morning, while Sophie was eating cereal. A number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer. "Mr. Mitchell," the voice said. "My name is Ashley Harmon. I'm the CEO of Oak Ridge Mall. We met last Thursday." Ryan set down his coffee mug. Sophie looked up from her cereal. "I remember," he said. "I was wondering," Ashley said, "if you'd be willing to come in. I'd like to talk with you about something." He looked at the refrigerator. The grocery list was still there. The milk was almost out. He needed to replace those gloves. "When?" he asked. The office was on the 4th floor of the mall's administrative wing, past a door that required a key card and through a hallway that looked nothing like the mall below it. No music, no perfume, no decorative garland. Just carpeted floors and indirect lighting and a conference room with a table that could seat 12 to 1. Ryan sat at the table in his good jeans. He'd worn a collared shirt, not a tie. He didn't own a tie, Or if he did, it was at the back of a closet somewhere from a funeral, and he hadn't gone looking for it. Ashley Harmon sat across from him. She had a folder and a cup of coffee she wasn't drinking. Dorothy Harmon sat to Ashley's right. Ryan had not expected Dorothy. He recognized her immediately, and something in his chest did a small, involuntary thing that he kept off his face. "Mr. Mitchell," Ashley said, "I want to tell you what happened, what we found when we reviewed the footage, what actions we took, and why you're here." She was precise. She laid it out cleanly. The footage, Jennifer Watts, Travis Cole, the audit. The numbers, 3 years. 41 similar complaint records buried in a system no one had been reviewing. A pattern that had grown comfortable in the absence of accountability. She said it without dramatic pause, without performance. Just the facts in order, with their consequences. Ryan listened. He didn't say anything. When she was done, she closed the folder. "You should know," she said, "that my grandmother's name is Dorothy Harmon. She founded the first Harmon store in 1977 on this site. She built everything this company is from that one store. She sold it to me 4 years ago, at well below market value, with the explicit condition that it remain run in a way she'd be proud of." Ashley's voice didn't waver. "Last Thursday, she came to test whether that condition was being honored." Ryan looked at Dorothy. Dorothy met his eyes. Did you know that when—" He stopped. Started again. "When you were out front, did you know who she was?" "No," Ryan said. "Why did you say something?" Ryan was quiet for a moment. He looked at his hands on the table, the scar above his left thumb. "My daughter was crying," he said. "She was 6 years old, and she was watching something wrong happen, and she was crying." He paused. "I couldn't walk past that. I couldn't let her see me walk past that." Dorothy was looking at him the way she'd looked at him in the atrium. That same careful, deciding attention. "Mr. Mitchell," Ashley said, "I want to offer you a position." Ryan looked at her. "Director of Service Conduct and Guest Dignity," she said. "It's a new role. It doesn't exist yet. You'd be building it. The mandate is straightforward. You monitor how guests are treated across the entire Oak Ridge property. You have full authority to investigate complaints, retrain staff, recommend terminations, and escalate directly to me." She paused. "You report to me, not to department managers. You can't be pressured by anyone beneath my level." Ryan said nothing. "The salary is $68,000 to start," Ashley said, "with a review at 6 months." Ryan Mitchell, who made $31,000 a year moving freight in 38-degree weather, sat very still. "I don't have a degree," he said. "Not in anything like this." "I know," Ashley said. "I've never worked in retail or management or—" "I know that too." "Then why?" "Because," Ashley said, "I need someone in that role who will do the right thing when they don't know who they're doing it for." She held his eyes. "You already proved you can do that. Twice, actually. Once in the atrium, and once again just now when you said you didn't walk past it because of your daughter." She paused. "I don't need a degree. I need that." The room was quiet. Ryan looked at Dorothy. Dorothy was still watching him with that expression. "She's right, you know," Dorothy said. Her voice was dry and warm at the same time. "I hired Cecilia Park in 1977 because she looked every customer in the eye. She didn't have a degree either. She picked up her coffee cup. Best hire I ever made." Ryan looked down at the table. He thought about Hartwell Distribution, about 6 a.m. starts and gloves with holes and Dave Keller's friendly warning voice. He thought about Sophie's purple coat, slightly too big, bought with next year in mind. "Can I have a few days?" he said. "Of course," Ashley said. He stood up, shook Ashley's hand. Then Dorothy's. Her grip was firm, her skin dry and cool, the hand of someone who had worked her whole life. Mr. Mitchell, Dorothy said as he turned to go. He looked back. Thank you, she said. For last Thursday. Ryan nodded once. He walked out through the card-key door and through the administrative hallway and back into the mall, where the pop music was playing again, and the cinnamon candle smell was drifting out of a holiday pop-up store, and he stood for a moment in the middle of it all. Then he took out his phone and called his daughter's school to check what time pickup was. He took the job. He gave 2 weeks' notice at Hartwell and spent his last shift working the loading dock in the same way he'd worked every other shift. Careful, thorough, without drama. He said goodbye to Marcus over vending machine coffee. Marcus said, "Man, you're going to be great at that." And Ryan had said, "I don't know about that." And Marcus had said, "Yeah, you do." He started at Oak Ridge on a Monday in December. The first thing he did was walk the whole property. Every floor, every corridor, every service entrance and back hallway. He introduced himself to cashiers and cleaning staff and the woman at the information kiosk who had worked there for 11 years and whose name was Beverly and who, it turned out, had been keeping her own informal log of incidents for the last 3 years because she'd never had anyone to report them to. He read Beverly's log cover to cover. It took 2 hours. Then he wrote his first memo to Ashley, 3 pages long, single-spaced, and left it on her desk. She called him at 7:30 the next morning. "This is exactly what I needed," she said. "Beverly's the one who had the information," Ryan said. "I just asked." A small pause. "Ryan," Ashley said, "that's the whole job." He thought about that for a long time. Sophie asked him about it on a Friday night in the second week of December. They were eating dinner, pasta again, the one with the sauce she liked, the jar kind with mushrooms added in because she'd gone through a mushroom phase, and Ryan was riding it as long as it lasted. She was swinging her feet under the table, which meant she was thinking about something. "Dad," she said. "Yeah. That old lady at the mall. She poked a mushroom. Did you know she was important?" Ryan looked at her. "No," he said. "I didn't." Sophie considered this. "So you didn't know she was the boss of the whole place?" "I had no idea." "But you still—" She stopped. "Poked another mushroom. You still helped her." "Yeah." "Why?" Ryan set down his fork. He looked at his daughter. The loose braid, the purple sauce on the corner of her lip, the brown eyes that had been wet in an atrium 12 days ago, in a way that had changed something in him. Or maybe it hadn't changed something. Maybe it had just confirmed something that had been there for a long time, waiting for him to stop talking himself out of it. "Because she needed help," he said. "And I was there." Sophie thought about this for a while. "But you didn't know it would turn out good," she said. "No," Ryan said. "I didn't." "So you just did it anyway." "Yeah." She nodded slowly, the way kids nod when they're filing something away somewhere important. "That's why it matters," she said. It wasn't a question. Ryan looked at her. "Yeah," he said quietly. "That's why it matters." 3 weeks after the incident at the door, Dorothy Harmon had lunch with Ashley in the private lounge on the first floor. The bakery bag was back on the table. The parking lot outside the window was filling up with pre-holiday traffic. The long, slow stream of headlights and exhaust and people carrying more things than they needed. "Was it planned?" Ashley asked. "Coming in that coat, the test." Dorothy was quiet for a moment. "You know what I was thinking about when I put it on." Ashley waited. 1977, Dorothy said. Opening day. I wore a dress I'd had since college and a pair of flats I'd repaired twice. She looked at the window. A woman came in, a very well-dressed woman, very sure of herself, and she looked at me and said, "Is there someone in charge I can speak to?" And I said, "I'm in charge." And the look on her face, Dorothy almost smiled. She didn't believe me, because of the dress. What did you do? I helped her find exactly what she was looking for. Dorothy sipped her coffee. She came back every year for 30 years. Ashley looked at her grandmother. You wear that coat because you never forgot that day, Ashley said. Dorothy didn't answer right away. She watched the parking lot, the headlights moving in their slow, patient lines. I wear it, she said finally, because it's my coat. Because I worked for what I have, and I don't need to prove it to anyone who's going to make me prove it before they'll let me through a door. She set down the coffee. And because I want the people who work for me, who work for you now, to be the kind of people who hold the door open anyway. Ashley said nothing. Most of them weren't, Dorothy said, but one of them was. She reached into the canvas tote and pulled out the bakery bag and set it on the table between them. Coffee cake. 2 pieces. Eat, she said. You look like you've been at your desk since 6. Ashley reached for a piece. 7, she admitted. Dorothy nodded once, satisfied, the way mothers and grandmothers nod when the world is behaving at least somewhat reasonably. Outside, the headlights kept moving. The holiday traffic kept filing in. And somewhere on the first floor of Oak Ridge Mall, a man with a scar above his left thumb was walking the corridors, introducing himself to people by name, asking them how their day was going, and meaning it. Ryan Mitchell sat at his new desk, a real desk, with a monitor and a filing tray and a cup of pens, on a Thursday morning exactly 4 weeks after the day he'd walked into Oak Ridge Mall to buy a pair of shoes. Sophie had gotten the pink ones, in the end. They'd found them at a store on the east end of the mall, a mid-sized place with a friendly floor staff and a display wall organized by color. The pair she'd picked had a small silver star on the ankle. They were $11 over budget, and Ryan had bought them anyway. She wore them every day. He thought about that sometimes, about how that morning had started. The cracked Civic, the too big coat, the grocery list on the refrigerator, the $11 over budget shoes. He thought about the 4 seconds he'd stood still in the corridor, calculating risk, measuring cost. He thought about Sophie's face. He thought about Dorothy in her gray wool coat, standing straight at a door that had been closed in front of her, in a building she had built with her own hands from $11,000, and a 28-year-old's belief that doing things with decency wasn't weakness. It was the whole point. He opened Beverly's updated log on his computer. He started reading. At 6:43 a.m., before most of the stores had opened, before the pop music kicked on and the cinnamon candles started burning and the holiday traffic lined up in the parking lot, the mall was quiet. And in that quiet, in a desk on the 4th floor, a man who had worked loading docks his whole life was doing a job that hadn't existed a month ago. Because he had helped someone who couldn't do anything for him. Because his daughter had been watching. Because Dorothy Harmon, who had lived long enough to know the difference between performance and character, had decided he was worth trusting. And because somewhere between the cracked bumper and the Silver Star shoes, Ryan Mitchell had remembered something he must have known all along, that the way you treat people when there's nothing in it for you is the only true thing there is. The rest is just furniture. If this story stayed with you, drop a comment and tell us, have you ever seen a stranger do the right thing when no one else would? Or been that stranger yourself? We want to hear it. If stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Every story we share is about the quiet, human moments that remind us what actually matter. We'll see you in the next one. Thank you for watching. Really.
This story follows Marcus Webb, a brilliant black toxicologist whose life was destroyed after he tried to expose dangerous research misconduct at a pharmaceutical institute. Once respected as Dr. Marcus Webb, he lost everything: his career, reputation, home, and marriage, after powerful people discredited his findings. Years later, he works quietly as a hospital janitor while raising his 7-year-old daughter, Maya, in a small but carefully organized apartment. Though the world now sees him as invisible, Marcus never stopped being a scientist. At the same hospital, 9-year-old Chloe Sterling, daughter of powerful CEO Eleanor Sterling, lies unconscious with a mysterious illness no doctor can explain. 18 specialists have failed to find a diagnosis. Eleanor, a woman used to controlling every outcome through power and money, watches helplessly as her daughter fades away. While cleaning the hospital at night, Marcus notices something strange outside Chloe's room: the faint chemical scent of DMSO, a compound he recognizes instantly from his toxicology background. His instincts tell him something is terribly wrong. Quietly, he begins observing patterns, documenting dates, tracking medical staff rotations, and recording chemical traces in a notebook. The evidence points toward a horrifying possibility: someone is poisoning Chloe. The more Marcus investigates, the more suspicion centers around Dr. Thorne, Chloe's trusted physician. Thorne appears compassionate, ethical, and devoted, exactly the kind of man no one would question. But Marcus discovers a disturbing connection between Thorne's hospital shifts and Chloe's worsening condition. Behind the scenes, Thorne is secretly involved in a financial conspiracy tied to Sterling Corp's stock manipulation, where Chloe's death would trigger massive profits through a carefully timed short sale. Marcus desperately tries to warn Eleanor, but his past and appearance work against him. His PTSD causes his explanation to come out fragmented, and Eleanor sees only an unstable janitor approaching her daughter's room. Security removes him, and he is fired from the hospital for suspicious behavior. Most people would stop there. Marcus does not. Working from a makeshift laboratory beneath his apartment, he uses his remaining scientific skills to create a diagnostic reagent capable of exposing the toxin. Knowing time is running out, he risks everything by returning to the hospital one final night. Inside Chloe's room, Marcus interrupts Thorne just as the doctor prepares another injection. Security tackles Marcus, and once again he looks like the villain. But before being restrained, he asks Eleanor to take a blue vial from his jacket and test the liquid Thorne dropped. She hesitates, torn between the trusted doctor and the disgraced janitor. Then she remembers the look Marcus gave her days earlier, not threatening, but urgent. A look of someone trying to stop something terrible. She trusts him. The moment the reagent touches the liquid, it turns deep purple-black, undeniable proof of poisoning. The truth finally surfaces. Police discover financial records and evidence of a massive conspiracy involving Thorne and an investment group seeking profit from Eleanor's tragedy. Chloe survives. The toxin is identified, treatment begins, and her recovery slowly starts. But the greatest healing happens outside the ICU. Eleanor realizes how easily she judged Marcus based on fear, status, and appearances. Instead of offering money or empty apologies, she visits his apartment and begins again, not with power, but with honesty. The story closes with hope. Marcus is restored to the scientific world as director of toxicology at Sterling Corp's new research lab. Yet he keeps his old custodial badge beside his new ID card, a reminder of who he was, what he survived, and the price of being ignored. Nearby sits a photograph of Chloe and Maya laughing together, proof that compassion can bridge worlds adults often divide. This story reminds us that truth does not become less true simply because the wrong person speaks it. Marcus lost credibility in society's eyes, but his knowledge, integrity, and purpose never disappeared. Sometimes the world dismisses people not because they are wrong, but because listening to them is inconvenient. The story also shows that appearances can be dangerously misleading. Dr. Thorne looked trustworthy, while Marcus looked suspicious. Yet goodness and evil rarely announce themselves clearly. Real judgment requires patience and humility. Another powerful lesson is that expertise and identity are not the same as social status. Marcus remained a scientist even while pushing a cleaning cart.